Man, that plane crash in Philly on January 31st, it really hit me hard. You know, the Learjet 55, an air ambulance, it crashed just seconds after takeoff.
Yeah, it's just awful. And what makes it even more striking, well, beyond just the tragedy itself, is the timing.
Mm.
Just 2 days, 48 hours before this, we had that horrible midair collision near D.C.
Mm.
67 people died. It makes you wonder, what what is going on up there?
Right. We've got this in-depth analysis article about the Philly crash here, and I have to tell you, even just skimming through it, I got chills. 6 people on board, all Mexican nationals, the pilot, the co-pilot, a doctor and paramedic team on board, a 6-year-old patient, and his mom. They were on their way to Springfield, Missouri for treatment.
And it all happened so fast. They took off from Northeast Philadelphia Airport, and then only like 30 seconds later.
The jet just slams right into a residential area near Roosevelt Mall. It's unimaginable. Those final moments for those on board, for anyone who saw it from the ground, this huge explosion, homes on fire, debris everywhere for blocks.
It's incredible, the force involved. I mean, the debris field was so big, they had to, evacuate houses, close roads, total chaos.
6 fatalities from the plane instantly. And then, so tragically, 1 person on the ground died too, plus 19 people hurt, some really badly. It's a lot to process. There's one little bit of hope, though. This young boy, he was hit by some of the debris when he was protecting his sister. At first, it looked really, really bad, but he's recovering. It's remarkable against all odds.
Yeah, that's the human spirit, isn't it? Even in the middle of something like this, there's always some glimmer of hope.
Okay, so what do we know about the cause? The article says the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they're still investigating. I mean, it's no surprise. These things they're complicated.
Right? It's not like they can just plug the black box into some computer
Yeah.
and get an answer. It's a slow, careful process. You examine every single piece of the wreckage, looking for any sign of mechanical failure, maybe damage from a bird strike. I mean, you name it, they look at it. And plus, all the radar data, what the weather was like, and then, of course, the recordings from the cockpit.
The cockpit recordings. The article mentioned that air traffic control, they heard the pilot declare an emergency. It was just moments after takeoff. But what kind of emergency? Like, what did he say?
Well, the NTSB, they're being very quiet about it right now. They say it's to protect the investigation. So the specifics of what that pilot said, what he was going through, we don't know yet.
Okay, that makes sense. But those recordings, they have to be crucial, right? Like they're a window into those final moments. Not just what they said, but maybe any alarms going off, any sounds that could help investigators figure out what went wrong.
Exactly. And it's not just about the plane itself. They look into the pilots' backgrounds, too. Their training records, how many hours they've flown, medical history, anything that might explain their actions.
So it's not just the plane, like a broken machine. It's understanding the people flying it, the choices they made.
Precisely. A plane doesn't just, crash. There's a whole series of events, all these factors that come together to lead to something like this. There's rarely just one simple answer.
It's actually kind of scary when you think about it. How many things have to go right for a flight to be successful, but then just one thing goes wrong?
And the margin for error, especially during takeoff, is so small. I mean, the aircraft is at a critical point. It's full of fuel. It's low to the ground. Everything has to be working absolutely perfectly.
Speaking of things going wrong, the article mentions mechanical failure as a possible cause. What kind of mechanical failure on a plane could cause such a sudden, terrible crash?
Well, you always have to consider a catastrophic engine failure during takeoff. The plane loses thrust, it can't climb. And at that point, the pilot's options they're very limited.
And it happened so close to the airport. What about a bird strike? Isn't that a big worry during takeoff and landing?
Oh, absolutely. Birds are a constant danger for planes, especially when they're lower to the ground. Even a small bird hitting an engine can cause serious damage. It could even cause the engine to completely fail. Just imagine a flock of birds taking out both engines just after takeoff.
This is a tough one to talk about. What about pilot error? Could that have been a factor?
It's a sensitive topic, definitely. But from an error, it plays a part in a lot of accidents, not just in aviation, but all kinds of industries. The investigators, they look at everything very carefully. The pilot's training, their experience, how they make decisions under pressure. Did they misjudge something? Did they react too slowly? These are hard questions, but they have to be asked.
We've been talking about the technical side, but I keep thinking about the people. The eyewitnesses, those people who are just living their lives, going about their evening, and then suddenly they see this fireball explode in the sky.
The article quoted someone saying, It sounded like a bomb went off. Imagine the terror, the shock. A
Yeah.
perfectly ordinary evening just shattered in a moment, and the families who lost loved ones.
Their lives are changed forever. And it's not just the people directly involved, it's the ripple effect on the whole community, the first responders who have to deal with the aftermath. It really makes you stop and think about how fragile life is.
It does. It makes you face your own mortality, doesn't it? But it also reminds us that we have to learn from these tragedies. We have to keep working to make flying safer so that hopefully fewer families will have to go through this kind of pain in the future.
That's a really good point. So where do we go from here? We know that the NTSB, they're working hard to piece together what happened, to find the things that led to this crash. What are they going to focus on in their investigation?
One key thing they'll be looking at is the plane's maintenance records. Was there any sign of problems beforehand? Were all the necessary inspections and repairs done correctly?
That makes sense. And they'll also be analyzing the wreckage itself, right? Trying to find clues about what happened in those last few moments.
Exactly. They go over every single piece of debris. They're looking for signs of a mechanical failure, impact damage, anything that helps them reconstruct what happened. It's like forensic science, but for airplanes.
This is where it gets really interesting, don't you think? Putting together a puzzle, but you don't have all the pieces.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the most important pieces is going to be those cockpit voice recordings. They'll listen to every word, every sound, trying to understand what was happening in the cockpit during those critical seconds.
Like, did the pilots see a problem? Did they react the right way? Those recordings could hold the answers.
And they'll also be looking at things outside the plane. What was the weather like? What was the communication with air traffic control? Was there any interaction with other aircraft in the area? They really do leave no stone unturned.
So while we're waiting for the NTSB to finish their investigation, we're left with these big questions. What happened? Could it have been prevented? And what can we learn from this to stop it from happening again?
Those are the questions that drive these investigations. And
Oh.
ultimately, those are the questions that drive us to keep improving aviation safety.
It's kind of crazy to think about all those flights happening every day all over the world and how much has to go right just to keep them safe. Makes this crash feel even more, I don't know, unsettling.
Yeah, you're right. It does. It really shows how complicated aviation safety is. There's so many systems all working together. The aircraft design, how it's maintained, air traffic control, pilot training. It only takes one little thing to break down, and it can be catastrophic.
Like that Swiss cheese model, right? They talk about that as it's like all these layers of safety, but if the holes in each layer line up.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect way to put it. Each hole is a weakness, and if enough of them line up, that's how you get an accident. It's a pretty sobering thought. Even in an industry like aviation, so regulated, so technologically advanced, accidents still can happen.
So when the NTSB investigates a crash like this, they're not looking for just one cause, right? They're looking for all those holes that lined up.
Exactly. They're trying to understand the whole picture, the chain of events, and that means looking at things that might seem small, insignificant on their own, but could have played a role.
So they're like detectives piecing together all these little clues to try and figure out what happened.
Yes. And they use all sorts of tools, techniques. They analyze the wreckage, talk to witnesses, go over maintenance records, and of course, listen to those cockpit recordings.
Okay, but how do they even know where to start? I mean, a plane crash, it's such a mess.
You're right. It's not easy. But the NTSB has a system. They've got teams of experts trained to record the scene, collect evidence, analyze data. Often, they'll start by making a detailed map of where all the debris landed. That can help them understand the plane's path, the angle of impact.
So they're actually putting the accident back together piece by piece.
Yeah, you could say that. And they'll be searching for specific parts of the aircraft too, like the engines, the flight controls, the black boxes.
Yeah, the black boxes. Those are like the key to everything, right? In a crash investigation.
They are. They are extremely important. They record all sorts of flight data, like the altitude, speed, heading, as well as the audio from the cockpit. Gives investigators a look into what the pilots were doing, saying.
But those black boxes, they're not indestructible, are they? What if they're damaged in the crash?
Well, they're built to be tough. They can withstand some pretty intense impacts, heat. But it's possible for them to get damaged, yeah? But even if they are, the NTSB, they've got people who can usually get at least some data from them, even if it's not much.
It's amazing what they can do with technology these days, but data is one thing. How do they figure out the human side of it? Was it pilot error? Or were they dealing with something they couldn't control?
That's one of the hardest parts of these investigations. You have to be so careful, objective, when you're looking at how the pilot performed. Things they take into account are the pilot's training, their experience, the weather conditions, how complex the situation was, any communication with air traffic control.
So it's not about pointing fingers at the pilot. It's about trying to understand why they made the decisions they did.
Right. And a lot of times pilot error isn't the only cause of a crash. It's just one piece of the puzzle. Remember that Swiss cheese model. There might be other things going on, problems with maintenance, mistakes by air traffic control, all contributing.
The article talked about the possibility of mechanical failure in this crash. What are some of the things that could go wrong with a plane, mechanically, I mean, to make it crash?
Well, there's a lot of possibilities. Engine problems, structural issues, problems with the flight control systems. Engine failures are probably the most frequent cause of accidents, especially during takeoff and landing.
Wait, hold on. Why are engine failures more common during takeoff and landing?
Well, it's because during those parts of the flight, the engines are working really hard at high power settings. And if something goes wrong, there's not much room for error. If an engine fails while they're cruising, the pilot usually has more time and more altitude to handle it.
That makes sense. Okay, so if one engine fails, can't the pilot just, land the plane using the other one?
Yeah, they can. Modern planes are designed to be able to fly and land on just one engine. But it's still a very difficult situation for the pilot, especially if it happens during takeoff when the plane is heavy and low to the ground.
So what kind of things can go wrong with an engine to make it fail?
Oh, lots of things. Could be a problem with the fuel system, the ignition system, the lubrication system,
Right.
or even a bird strike. Bird strikes are actually a pretty big danger for planes, especially during takeoff and landing.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. Even a little bird can cause a lot of damage to an engine.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes a bird strike can even take out both engines. If that happens during takeoff, well, it's usually not good.
That's a scary thought. But what about other mechanical problems besides engines? What else could happen?
Well, there could be problems with the plane's structure itself, like a crack in the wings or the body of the plane from wear and tear. Or maybe a problem with the flight control systems, where the pilot can't control the plane anymore. These kinds of things are less common than engine failures, but they can be just as bad.
I'm starting to see why these investigations are so complicated. It's not just finding one thing that caused it. It's about understanding how all these different things might have worked together.
You got it. It's like a giant puzzle. And the NTSB, they're carefully putting it all together, piece by piece.
And the things they find out can help prevent other accidents from happening, right?
That's exactly right. That's the whole point of doing these investigations, to learn from these tragedies and make flying safer for everyone.
Speaking of making flying safer, what are some of the things, technology, or procedures that have already been put in place over the years to improve safety?
Oh, there have been tons of advancements, but some of the biggest are, well, developing more reliable engines, introducing fly-by-wire flight control systems, implementing advanced navigation and communication systems. These technologies have really reduced the risk of accidents caused by mechanical problems, pilot error, and air traffic control mistakes.
So even though accidents still happen, flying is a lot safer now than it used to be.
Oh, absolutely. The number of accidents has been going down steadily, thanks to all the improvements in technology and safety procedures.
That's good to hear. But what about the future? Are there any new technologies coming out that could make flying even safer?
Oh, there's a bunch of exciting developments coming, like using artificial intelligence to help pilots, developing autonomous aircraft, integrating drones into the airspace. These technologies could really change things, reduce human error, and make air traffic management more efficient.
Wow. It's amazing to think about the future of flying, how technology keeps pushing the limits of what's possible. But at the same time, we can't forget about the people who were lost in this crash in Philadelphia.
Absolutely, we have to remember them. While we're celebrating all these new advancements, we can't forget about the lives lost and the families affected.
Well said. And I think that takes us back to the question we had at the beginning, what's going on up there? We talked about how complex aviation safety is, how hard it is to investigate accidents, and the potential for new technologies to make things better. But in the end, flying is still risky and accidents will happen.
That's true. But as we've seen, the risk is going down all the time because people are working hard to improve safety. And it's important to remember that most flights take off and land without any problems.
Yeah.
We can't let fear stop us from flying, but we should be aware of the risks.
That's a good way to look at it. So as we're moving towards the end of our deep dive, what are some of the key things you hope our listeners will take away from this?
Well, I hope they'll understand better how complex aviation safety is, all the work that goes into investigating these accidents, and how important it is to learn from them so we can prevent them in the future.
Very well said. And I think our listeners should also remember that behind all the data, all the technical stuff, there are real people who were affected by this crash. Their lives have changed forever. We should take a moment to remember them and their families.
I agree. Our thoughts are with them.
It's hard not to think about this Philly crash and their other one near DC. Just a couple days before, 67 people died, a midair collision, an American Airlines flight, and a military helicopter. It really brings home what you were saying about, like, how complicated airspace is, how many things have to go right just to avoid disaster.
It does make you think. The fact that these two things happen so close together, it raises a lot of questions. Like, what's the overall state of aviation safety? Are there bigger issues that need to be addressed?
Right, like, is this just a horrible coincidence? Or is there something more to it? It seems like everyone's looking to the NTSB for answers, not just about what caused these crashes, but how to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, people want to feel safe. They want to know that flying is still okay, that the system works. The NTSB, they've got a big job to give people that reassurance, and not just with words, but with real investigations,
Yeah.
thorough and transparent, that figure out the root causes so real changes can be made.
Okay, so we've talked about mechanical failures, human error, bird strikes. It's it's almost overwhelming thinking about all the things that can go wrong. It makes you wonder, what can we do, like as individuals, to feel safer when we fly?
Well, I think the first thing is to choose airlines that have a good safety record.
Mm,
Do your research, read reviews, pay attention to any safety concerns people have raised about certain airlines.
that's a good point. We often just look at price and convenience, but safety should really be the top priority.
Absolutely. And then once you're on the plane, listen to the safety briefing. Follow the instructions from the flight attendants. I know it can seem routine, but those safety procedures are there for a reason.
Right, like I admit I sometimes tune out during those,
hmm
but maybe I should start paying more attention.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
And as passengers, we can do more. We have a voice. We can push for stronger safety rules, support more funding for research, and demand that airlines and regulators be accountable.
So it's not just about sitting there, it's about being informed, being proactive about safety.
Exactly. We can all play a part in making flying safer.
I remember reading something about the time of day you fly and how it could affect safety. Is there anything to that?
Well, statistically, yeah. Early morning flights seem to have fewer accidents. One thought is that pilots are more alert, more rested earlier in the day, plus there's usually less air traffic in the mornings.
Interesting. So maybe I should book those early flights more often. What about the plane itself? Does the type of plane make a difference when it comes to safety?
All planes that are allowed to fly have to meet strict safety standards. But newer planes usually have the latest safety features and technology. So while you can't always choose what type of plane you're on, it's something to think about.
Okay, so we've talked about what we as individuals can do, but what about the bigger picture? What are some of the things that could make aviation safer in the future? Technology or new ways of doing things?
Well, one really promising area is developing better collision avoidance systems. Right now, we have systems that warn pilots about potential conflicts. But in the future, these systems could actually take action on their own automatically to prevent mid-air collisions.
Wow, that sounds futuristic. Like the plane would just fly itself out of danger.
It's closer than you think.
Hmm.
And another area is using data analytics to find potential risks before they cause accidents. By looking at tons of flight data, we might be able to spot patterns, trends that could point to a problem with a specific plane, a particular route, or even a pilot's behavior.
That's amazing. Like using big data to predict and prevent accidents before they happen.
Exactly. And then there's the development of unmanned aircraft systems, drones. While drones have their own safety issues, they can also improve aviation safety by doing things that are too dangerous for human pilots, like inspecting planes for damage or keeping an eye on remote airspace for hazards.
It sounds like the future of flying is going to be really exciting. But with all this technology, we can't forget about the human side of things, right? We have to remember what we've learned from past accidents and keep working to make things better.
You're absolutely right. Technology is great, but it's only as good as the people behind it. We have to keep investing in training, education, and a culture of safety at every level of the aviation industry.
Well said. This has been a fascinating deep dive. Really makes you think. We've covered a lot, from the Philly crash to the bigger questions about aviation safety. I think you've given our listeners a lot to consider.
I hope so. It's definitely been a reminder that aviation safety is a continuous process. It never ends. And we all have a role to play in making flying as safe as it can be.
So, to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Given everything we've talked about, what would you say are the most important steps we need to take to make flying safer, both in the short term and the long term? It's a question we all need to consider as we continue to fly. Thanks for joining us.